In society, people often draw conclusions about others based solely on how they look, how they dress, or the setting in which they are seen. This bias, conscious or unconscious, plays out every day in subtle and not so subtle ways, especially in places where wealth is on display. One of the clearest manifestations of this behavior is found in environments that cater to luxury, such as high-end retail stores, five-star hotels, and luxury car dealerships. A person who does not look the part is frequently assumed to be out of place, even if they belong more than anyone else in the room. The treatment of a simple woman who walks into a luxury dealership and is turned away because she doesn't fit the visual profile of a typical high-paying customer is a stark and powerful example of how quickly and cruelly people can be misjudged based on appearance alone. Asterisk, a woman entering a dealership, dressed in unremarkable clothes, is not an unusual occurrence. Many successful people deliberately choose not to flaunt their wealth. They value privacy, comfort, or even humility over ostentatious fashion. However, in the eyes of a commission-hungry salesman or a staff trained to prioritize important clients, a customer's appearance becomes a shortcut to gauge their worth. These shortcuts are dangerous. They allow for discrimination to go unchecked under the guise of business practicality. When that woman is dismissed, not even offered a brochure or a test drive, it shows how assumptions are allowed to shape customer service policies in environments that claim to be professional. Asterisk, the assumption made here is simple and cruel. If someone does not dress in branded clothes, carry a luxury handbag, or speak in a particular tone, then they must not be able to afford what's being sold. It's the same mentality that leads security guards to follow around young men of color in department stores, or restaurant hosts to give prime tables to people in suits while telling others to wait. The woman in this story was not asking for charity. She had walked into a business with an interest in making a legitimate purchase, potentially one of the most expensive purchases someone can make aside from buying a house. And yet, her humanity, her potential, and her money were all dismissed based on how she looked. Asterisk. What makes this kind of bias especially harmful is how normalized it becomes in environments where luxury is common. For those who work in or frequent such spaces, wealth becomes a language, and the assumption is that everyone who speaks it must use the same words. The cars they drive, the watches they wear, the brands they endorse become shorthand for value and credibility. People who dress plainly or modestly are perceived as lacking taste, wealth, or knowledge. In fact, in some elite circles, there's even a false equation. Modest dress equals financial incompetence. So, when someone like the woman in the story challenges that equation simply by being present in the space, it threatens the logic that the sales staff have built their careers upon. Asterisk, this is not just a matter of hurt feelings. It's a deeper injustice. When people are denied opportunities, access, or even respect based on their appearance, we as a society endorse inequality. The dealership's refusal to serve the woman properly is not just a customer service mistake. It's a reflection of a broader social illness, one where surface impressions dictate human value. What's worse is that this prejudice often goes unchallenged because it is cloaked in business sense. A salesman might say, "I have to use my time wisely," or "I can't spend hours with someone who's clearly not a serious buyer." But this logic assumes that serious buyers look a certain way. It makes space for laziness and judgment, and ultimately, for the loss of what could have been a long-term loyal customer. Asterisk, we see this time and again in various social settings. Consider the countless stories where tech entrepreneurs walk into meetings in hoodies and are mistaken for interns, only to later be revealed as CEOs. Or consider the classic tale of the hotel guest who gets ignored at the concierge desk, only to later reveal they are the owner of the building. In all these stories, a common thread runs. Appearance-based assumptions lead to embarrassing, even humiliating misjudgments. People are often more than what they appear to be. But not everyone gets the chance to reveal that because too many doors are closed too early. Asterisk, it's also worth noting how gender plays a role in this story. A woman, especially one who appears simple, is often doubly underestimated. In male-dominated industries like automotive sales, women are still frequently assumed to lack knowledge or authority. If that woman walks in alone without a man by her side, she's seen as less serious. The combination of her gender, her appearance, and her modesty creates a trifecta of bias. She isn't just ignored, she's dismissed entirely. And that dismissal is not only wrong, it's short-sighted. It ignores the complexity and diversity of real-world wealth. Today's millionaires aren't all white-haired men in suits. They are women, people of color, immigrants, coders, artists, investors, nurses who built businesses, and countless others who defy the outdated stereotypes of what wealth should look like. Asterisk, another dimension is cultural. In many cultures, flaunting wealth is considered distasteful. Some of the wealthiest individuals on the planet, Warren Buffett, for instance, live modest lives and wear ordinary clothes. Should a man like Buffett walk into a dealership without introducing himself, would he be dismissed too? Possibly. And what would that say about the dealership's values? that only visible wealth matters, that kindness or politeness without a Rolex on the wrist is worthless. Asterisk, this brings us to the emotional cost of such assumptions. Being judged unfairly hurts. It sends a message that who you are is less important than how you look, that no matter your intelligence, your values, or your success, you will always be measured by shallow markers. And for those on the receiving end, the effect is not just embarrassment, it's alienation. It's the quiet voice that whispers, "You don't belong here," even when you've earned every right to walk through that door. Asterisk, it also breeds a kind of resentment that can have ripple effects. When businesses treat people poorly based on assumptions, word spreads. In today's world, one post on social media, one video, or even one review can destroy years of brand building. In the story, the billionaire husband doesn't shout, threaten, or retaliate with violence. Instead, he sends a message using the very symbols the dealership values most: luxury, status, and image. By sending his Rolls Royce and refusing to do business with them, he flips the script. He forces them to confront their mistake using their own flawed system of judgment, and the brilliance of this act lies in its simplicity. He doesn't need to argue. The silence of his gesture speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. Asterisk, ultimately, this story isn't just about a car dealership. It's about how we, as individuals and institutions, treat people. It's a reminder that wealth doesn't always wear gold, power doesn't always arrive with a crowd, and respect should never be conditional. The woman in the story didn't ask for special treatment. She asked for equal treatment. And that, perhaps, is what makes the dealership's failure so glaring. They didn't just lose a customer, they lost the chance to be decent, to be fair, and to grow beyond their assumptions. Asterisk, in a world obsessed with appearances, this story forces us to pause. It asks us to reconsider how we treat strangers, because behind every unassuming face could be a story, a journey, a level of success, or a human soul we never took the time to see. And maybe, just maybe, that person holds the power to change our lives if only we give them the respect they deserve from the start. Asterisk. There are many ways people choose to respond when they're wronged. Some confront the issue head-on, others complain loudly, while some simply walk away. But there's a rare and powerful form of response, quiet, graceful, yet devastating in its impact. It's a type of revenge that doesn't require raised voices or insults, but rather unfolds with such poise and confidence that the one who committed the offense is left stunned and exposed. In the context of this story, the reaction of the billionaire husband is not rooted in vengeance in the traditional sense, but in teaching a lesson, one that uses power and dignity rather than anger and chaos. It is revenge, served with class, and it is more effective than any argument ever could be. Asterisk, the day after his wife was humiliated and dismissed by the staff of the luxury car dealership, the billionaire could have called in with fury. He could have demanded an apology, posted publicly on social media, or even pursued legal action if he wanted to escalate the matter. But instead, he chose to speak in the language that the dealership understood best: prestige, reputation, and luxury. It was a calculated move. Rather than lower himself to the level of those who treated his wife with contempt, he allowed his actions to carry the message. By arriving in a Rolls Royce, a symbol of ultimate success and untouchable class, he used the very object of the dealership's obsession to highlight their failure. Asterisk, the genius of this approach lies in its restraint. While most people are tempted to react emotionally when wronged, this man demonstrated complete self-control. He didn't go to scream or threaten anyone. He didn't demand attention or attempt to embarrass anyone with harsh words. He simply showed up with a car that none of them could ignore, stepped out with elegance, and delivered a short, powerful message. In just a few words, he let them know who they had dismissed and what kind of opportunity they had thrown away, not by boasting or bragging, but by making it undeniably clear through action. He gave them no chance to argue or justify their behavior. There was nothing they could say in the presence of that level of quiet dominance. Asterisk. This act is not about showing off wealth for the sake of ego. It's about using influence to make a point in a way that sticks. The message wasn't just for the dealership, but for anyone who ever made assumptions about others based on appearances. It was a moment designed not to destroy, but to correct. Instead of crushing the staff or trying to get them fired, the billionaire gave them something much worse than a public shaming. He gave them a haunting realization. The man they would have fallen over themselves to impress was the same man whose wife they had looked down upon just 24 hours before. The moment they recognized her face, seated in the driver's seat of another luxury car, this time truly unreachable to them, it became painfully clear how deeply they had misjudged her. Asterisk, there's also a deeper psychological impact when revenge is served in this elegant manner. It doesn't trigger defensive behavior the same way that yelling or aggression does. When someone is confronted with dignity, especially when they know they've done something wrong, it hits much harder. It bypasses the instinct to fight back and instead forces reflection. The employees likely didn't sleep peacefully. That night the event probably played over in their minds again and again. They likely imagined different scenarios. What if they had just welcomed her? What if they had just offered her a test drive? What if they had asked her what she needed instead of pushing her away? The kind of regret that stems from a missed opportunity wrapped in arrogance lingers long after the moment is over. The husband's actions also highlight a different form of power, one that doesn't scream but commands attention anyway. The kind of power that comes from confidence, self-assuredness, and a strong moral compass. He didn't need to bring bodyguards or wave cash around. He let his presence and his message speak for themselves. This kind of silent strength is far more intimidating and far more memorable. When someone wrongs you, and you rise above the situation and still demonstrate that you are in control, it repositions the entire balance of power. You're no longer the victim. You become the teacher, and the wrongdoer becomes the student. This kind of classy revenge also protects your own peace. When people lash out, they often carry residual anger, frustration, and guilt. They replay the encounter, wondering if they said too much or too little. But when you handle a situation with elegance, there's a kind of closure that's clean and empowering. The billionaire didn't stoop to the level of bitterness or cruelty. He didn't make a spectacle out of the dealership or try to embarrass the staff in front of their colleagues. He simply let them face their own mistake, and then walked away, unbothered and still in control. There is a freedom in that, a kind of emotional untouchability that's rare and admirable. It's also important to recognize that his wife, the woman who had been humiliated, didn't ask for any of this revenge. That makes the husband's gesture even more meaningful. He saw the injustice, and he took it upon himself to set the record straight, not for vengeance, but out of love and respect. He didn't want his wife to go back to that dealership for an apology she didn't need. He didn't want her to prove anything to people who didn't deserve her time. Instead, he did something bold and symbolic that restored her dignity without forcing her to relive the experience. It was an act of protection, loyalty, and love expressed through the silent but thunderous arrival of a Rolls Royce. The moment becomes even more profound when you consider how differently it could have gone. The husband could have barged in, demanding to speak to the manager, trying to prove a point by shouting down the people who wronged her. But that would have been predictable. It would have been messy, aggressive, and ultimately forgettable. Instead, the choice to be refined in his response turned what could have been a forgettable confrontation into a story people would talk about for years. The dealership would remember the humiliation of being outclassed, not with insults, but with the very elegance they claimed to sell. They would remember the woman they laughed at walking in, and how she left with quiet power. There is also an unspoken lesson here about the nature of reputation and image. The dealership was in the business of luxury. Their entire brand identity was built around the idea of excellence, elegance, and elite customer experience. But the moment they judged someone by her appearance, they betrayed that brand. They proved that their values were shallow and inconsistent. The billionaire's subtle move exposed that hypocrisy. By refusing to yell and instead making a symbolic statement, he showed that true class cannot be bought or sold, it is lived. And by placing the Rolls Royce in their hands, he didn't give them a gift. He gave them a symbol of their own failure, a visual reminder, every single day, of what they lost, not because of bad luck, but because of bad behavior. This form of high-road revenge is rare, not just because it requires wealth or power, but because it demands emotional intelligence. It requires a person to feel pain or offense and not react immediately. It asks for patience, control, and the willingness to act, not out of rage, but out of intention. The person who serves revenge with class isn't trying to destroy others, they're trying to elevate the conversation, shift the dynamic, and leave no room for misunderstanding. It's about choosing to hold others accountable without lowering yourself to their level. And when done well, it doesn't just fix a single situation. It sets a lasting example of what grace under pressure truly looks like. Would you like this rewritten into a short film narration or motivational speech style? Next,